Hey everyone, in this video, we're going to go over the serializers inside of our Django REST framework crash course. So we're going to go over what they are, how they work, and how to create some really basic ones, and how to use them to get data ready to send from the API. So before we begin though, there's a few things to set up. First things first, make sure you go to your settings and you add catalog. As long as your app name is the same as mine, make sure you add that to your installed apps. And then from there, before this video started, I went ahead and I made 3 different model objects here, different model classes here, and I didn't want to spend the time in this video doing that since this video is about serializers. So the code for this will be in the description below if you want to get it there. Towards the end, we're going to use this a lot, so just so you know where that's at and where to get to it. Make sure those 2 changes are done, and then go ahead and migrate your changes. So run Python 3 manage.py, make migrations first. You should then get this thing here, migrations for catalog and all of your stuff that you added. And then go ahead and run Python 3 manage.py migrate to then actually migrate those changes to the database. And at that point, you should be ready to use those different model fields. So just make sure that's done before we get started. Okay, but now that we are ready to go, let's go ahead and start going through serializers. So I have the Django docs open over here. What serializers are, if you take a look here at the top, you can see a little exclamation up here. And pretty much what they are is it's a way to take different data structures in Python, different native data types, and then convert those things into something that can be easily rendered into JSON, XML, or something else. And in our case, in this example, we'll create JSON from this. They also allow you to deserialize, which is just the opposite, allow you to parse data back from these converted types back into the native Python data types. So really what it will allow us to do, it allows us to take these model instances and these different things we create here and different Python objects, dictionaries, arrays, anything else, and convert them into something that we can then create and send to our front end in the form of JSON after we render it as JSON. So it's just this kind of step in between of the Python code and the JSON in a way to get it into JSON and back into Python in an easy way. So that's all that we're doing here. In the API, they have the serializers page here. It gives some examples up here and some more examples down here, which is very useful if that's a little confusing. We're going to go ahead and work through these examples right now, hopefully to help make this all make sense if it doesn't yet. So if you get lost or confused, come back to this. There'll also be a link to it in the description, and this will tell you exactly what we're doing step by step. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So by following this example, first thing we'll do is we'll create a comment class. And this will just be an example class that we'll use here just to have something to work with that's a little more simple. So what this will be here will be a class right down here. I'm going to go ahead and just put a comment here and put serializers overview, because this is eventually going to be removed or at least commented out, so just to kind of separate from everything else. But first we'll create a simple class, add a couple fields, and then from there we'll have our Python native data types, and then we'll serialize that and convert it into JSON. So let's go ahead and create that class. So we'll create a comment class. This class will create a constructor. So in Python, a constructor is def $_init $_. If you don't know this, don't worry about it too much. It's just some Python syntax. We're not going to worry about it too much right now. But then make sure inside of parentheses here, you pass in self, email, content, and created, and we'll set the default value of created to none. So what we're doing here is we're creating an object here that has these 3 fields: email, content, and then created. And this is the data that we're actually going to serialize with our serializer. So now we'll go ahead and just set all of these fields. So we'll do a self.email equals email, a self.content equals content, self.created equals created. Okay, and that's just some setup to make sure this is ready to go. If you don't understand that, don't worry about it too much. These are the fields right here we're going to work with: email, content, and created. Okay, now we have an object to work with. Let's go ahead and create a serializer for this. Let's do a class comment serializer. And if you look at the Django docs here, the Django REST framework docs, you'll see here that we have different serializers available: serializer, ModelSerializer, Hyperlinked Serializer, list serializer, base serializer, etc. Right now, we're mainly going to focus on these first 3. as those are the most used ones. And for this first example, we're going to go over just the most basic serializer possible using just the serializer class. And so we can inherit that from the module serializers. There is a class in there called Serializer. So we can inherit it with serializers.serializer. So we'll add that here inside the class, serializers dot serializer, and we gotta make sure we import that correctly. So I'm going to just copy this line just from REST framework, import serializers. And now that we have that class set up there, let's go ahead and actually add some things here too. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a field for every field in our object that we want to convert and serialize into something we can convert to JSON. So I'm going to create one for an email, one for a content, and one for created. So we'll go ahead and create a serializer field for each. So we'll do an email equals serializers dot email field. Then we'll do content equals serializers dot char field. Pass in a max length equaling to 200. And then we'll go ahead and create a created field as well, serializers dot date time field. Okay, and so real quickly what these are. If you're familiar with the Django models, you'll notice some similarities. We're passing in our models a models.char field, a models.email field, a models.text field, and whatever else. In our serializers file, it's the same thing, but we're putting serializers.email field, serializers.char field, and everything else. In the documentation, if you go to API guide, there's a serializers field link here. And if you scroll down a little ways, right down here, you can start seeing all the different possibilities you have. All different options are all right here. So if you need to find a specific field that you want, you can look through here and find the ones that you need. There's all sorts of things, character, string ones, number, integer, date, time, file uploads, all sorts of things in here. And for a very basic serializer, that's all we need. All we need are the fields put inside a class that inherits from the serializer class. Okay, and now that we have this done, let's go ahead and run through some examples to show how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and open my terminal here. I'm going to go and clear all this out. And what we can do here, if you do an ls to see where we're at, as long as you're in the same directory as your manage.py, you can run python 3 manage.py shell. And now open up this Python shell that now we can use and import all of our stuff from our project and test some things out here inside this shell. And so that's what I'm going to use to test out all of the stuff we wrote here. So first, let's go ahead and import comment and comment serializer and try to use these things and see how they work. So first I'll go ahead and I'll do a from catalog, which is the name of our app, dot serializers, import comment and comment serializer. Now from here, let's go ahead and create a new comment object, and then we'll serialize that data. So I'll create a variable comment equals, and put comment with a capital C, and then in parentheses here, I'll put first an email, so test@example.com, and then I'll go ahead and put some content, and I'll go ahead and just put hello world, like that, and we'll create our object that way. Now we can go ahead and do a comment.email. We get our email, comment.name, or not name, comment.content, and we'll get our content. So we're getting all of our fields here. We have a native Python data type here we can use our normal Python code on to manipulate with. But let's go ahead now and serialize this into something that we can convert to JSON. So first, we have to serialize it. So we'll go ahead and use our serializer to do this. So I'll do a serializer equals comment serializer. And then I'll go ahead and pass in the instance that we want to, with the data we want to serialize. In this case, we saved it in this comment variable. So we'll go ahead and import that. We'll go ahead and pass in that. So do a comment inside of parentheses there. Now, we should have a serializer created with all of our serialized data inside of it. So if I were to do serializer.data, you can see now this is all of our data here that we have serialized. And you'll see here, I actually forgot to set the created. So I'm going to go ahead and set a default for that real quick, and we'll do this one more time. So inside the code here, we put self.created equals created, but if we don't have anything, we're going to do or date time.now, and make sure we have that imported. So up here at the top, we'll do from date time import date time. Okay, so let's go ahead now and just stop the console here. We'll do this one more time. So open up the shell. We'll import from catalog dot serializers, import comments, and we'll import comments serializer. Make sure we spell serializers correctly. Oops. Okay, there we go. Let's go ahead and clear this out and clean it up. And then we'll go ahead and create a new comment. Comment equals comment, and we'll pass in, once again, tests at example.com, and we'll pass in hello world, exclamation point, and we'll close that off. Then we can do a comment dot email, and we get our email. Okay, now we can go create a serializer again. Serializer equals comment serializer, and once again, we'll pass in the instance we want to serialize. In this case, it's saved inside that comment variable. We'll do that, and then we'll call serializer.data. And there we go. Now we have an email, a content, and a default created timestamp. And this is what our serialized data looks like. We've now converted our model instance into this Python data type here that we can then use to easily convert into JSON. So we took all of these different fields here we could call on our comment and put it inside of this dictionary here. And now we can convert this dictionary into JSON. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what we can do is we can import a renderer. And I'm not going to get too much into renderers right now, but there's a JSON renderer. It allows us to take this object right here, or this dictionary, I should say, right here, and convert it into JSON. So we'll go ahead and use that. So we can do from REST framework dot renderers import JSON renderer. And then we go ahead and use that. So do a JSON equals JSON renderer. And we'll call it .render on that function. And we'll pass in our serializer data, or .data, like that. And then we can go ahead and just call JSON. And then I will see we have this JSON here that looks just like this, except now we have all the extra stuff for having it converted into JSON. Now, this is something we could then send as a response from our API. So now we successfully converted this comment and all these fields here we can call with comment.email into some sort of Python dictionary right here, or a list or whatever else. In this case, it's a dictionary. We then take that dictionary, we put it inside this JSON renderer, and then we get back all this JSON here we can send as a response from our REST API. And so that's it. That's how you convert data from the Python model instances into some JSON that you can then send. You can also do the same thing but backwards. We can now take this JSON here and convert it back into that Python dictionary, and we can then use that to change things inside of our code. So then I could take this JSON thing here. Actually, first I'll import a couple things. I'll import IO. I'll also import from REST framework parsers. Just like we have renderers, we have parsers to then do the opposite. Take the JSON and take it back into Python. So from parsers, we can import JSON parser. We then create a stream, do io.bytes io, and pass in that JSON. We can then take that stream there, create a variable data, and pass it into our JSON parser. So we take JSON parser dot parse, and we can then pass in the stream. Now we can take a look at data. We now have that Python dictionary again. Now let's go ahead and take that data. Let's put it back into our serializer. So then we'll do serializer equals comment serializer. And this time we're doing something slightly different. We're going to do data equals data. And we need that just for this next step here. We can call serializer dot is underscore valid. Because like true. So if you don't pass data equals and just put data in here, this function is going to fail. So just make sure it's data equals data in this case. Just a small change there. But now we have we've checked that it is valid. Now we can go ahead and call serializer dot validated data. And there we go. Now we have this Python dictionary of all of the valid data from the JSON back into this Python dictionary we can now manipulate with our Python code. So from there, we've successfully taken a model instance, converted into a dictionary, converted it into JSON, and then took it back and created this ordered dictionary here that we can then manipulate back with our code again. So that's really what we're doing here when we do anything with our serializers, is we're just taking data and converting it into something else like that. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that kind of made sense of how we are converting data and what these serializers are doing under the hood. Most likely, you're never going to use all of that. That's a lot, and it might be kind of confusing. So if it is confusing, don't worry about it too much, because there's much easier ways to do all of this, especially when you have an actual models instance, a model instance inside your models.py. There's a much easier way to do that, and we'll go over that here in a second. But before we get to that, there's one more thing we need to talk about with these basic serializers. So inside of the serializer class, we can go ahead and create two new methods. We'll do a def, actually I'll put this here at the bottom. Do a def create, and we can pass in self and validated data. And for now, I'll just pass. And I'll do a def update as well. And this takes in self, instance, and validated data. Okay, so what are we doing here? Once we get this validated data back, we might want to change some things and then call save to then save this in the database. When we call save, we will run one of these two methods automatically. This is built into the serializer class. It's not something you have to worry about, but it's already built in. We'll either call create if this object does not already exist, or we'll call update if it already does exist. And so then we can write some custom code in here. Maybe we'll create a new object. We'll pass in our validated data like this. Or down here, maybe we'll go ahead and set the fields. So maybe we'll do something like instance.email equals validated data.get email instance email, etc. You can do that for all the fields. And so like right here, what we're doing, this validated data is exactly this right here. This is what we got back from our serializer. That's what this validated data is. This instance would be the actual model instance. In this case, it's just this comment object. And we're then taking the instance, so this comment, setting the email to be validated data.get and find the email key. So we'll find in here, do a get, find the email key, and then grab this value right here and set it to this comment object email field. And then so once we're done, as long as we have these two methods implemented, we can go ahead and call .save, and then we can go ahead and just save this into the database. And that's the kind of the process for a serializer. Hopefully that made sense. If not, you may need to watch that part again. It can be kind of confusing, but it's just the process of converting data from one type over to another is all we're doing there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go through some different types of serializers and how to make this much easier. So I'm gonna go and just comment this out. You won't use this all that much. Something you'll use more often would be something like a model serializer. So let's go ahead and create one now. So inside my models, we can pick a different model object. So in this case, I'll pick artist. I'll create an artist serializer. And we'll pass in serializers dot, instead of passing in just serializer, we'll pass in model serializer. And now inside of here, instead of having to set all these fields like we did here manually, what we can do instead is pass in a class meta. And then we can go ahead and set the model. So we'll do a model equals artist. And then you gotta make sure to import that here at the top. So we'll do from dot models import artist. And then after that, we can set the fields based off of our model fields. So instead of setting these manually down here, like we did with the serializers.email field, we take a look at this and it can find for us the matching field automatically based off of this field. So we have two options here. We could do fields equals and then put a list and pass in all of the names we want. So you could pass in name, email, bio, do name, comma, email, comma, bio, and that will serialize all of these fields inside of this list. Or if we want all of them, what we can do instead is put quotes, double underscore, all, double underscore, and that will get all of the fields from our model and serialize all of those fields. You can also, if you want, you could also use exclude. So we could do exclude and say we didn't want the bio. We could then put exclude equals bio or whatever else. But I'm not going to use that here. I'm going to use the fields double underscore all to get all of the fields and serialize all of those fields. And that's all we need for a really basic serializer. If we want, we could, it's optional, but we could go ahead and create a def create method and pass in self validated data, just like we did before. and then put in some custom logic here. We also do the same thing for update, but that's optional. This model serializer has some built-in default logic for this for us automatically. So if you don't want to implement those, you don't have to. This is all we need at the very basic level for a serializer, if we have a model object to go along with it, which in most cases you probably will. I'm going to go ahead and create 2 more of these real quick for our other 2 objects. So I'll go ahead and just do a paste this here and paste this here. And I'll change the name here from Artist Serializer to Album. And I'll also change Artist Serializer down here to Song Serializer. We'll change this to be Album. And we'll change this to be Song. And make sure to import those at the top as well. So we'll do Album and Song. And now with that, we have all the serializers we need to convert our data from our model instances into something we can convert into JSON. But there's some other options we could do if this is not exactly what you want. If you look at the documentation, we have one more type of serializer we're going to go over in this video, which is a hyperlinked model serializer. So instead of a model serializer, what we get is we get a primary key ID field. So this one, I'll put a comment here. This one automatically sets a PK field. So an example would be like ID set to 1 or whatever else. And if we have a hyperlinked serializer, so I'll go ahead and down here and I'll create another artist serializer. This one I'll create is an artist hyperlinked serializer. We'll pass in serializers dot hyperlinked model serializer. This one, on the other hand, sets this one will set a URL field instead of a PK field. So instead of getting the ID of 1 that we got up here, what we're getting instead will be something like this. Example will be URL, and we'll set it equal to HTTP, and it'll be something like api.example.com/artist/1 or whatever else. So this is kind of an example of what that looked like. So instead of just getting an ID, we'll get this entire URL as the kind of the primary key for that field. And so you may want this instead. Most of the times I usually use this, but this is also another option if you want to use that. But this works the same way from here. We can go ahead and create a class meta, do a model equals artist, and do fields equals either the list or just double underscore all double underscore. And then once again, we could go ahead and do a def update, self instance, validated data, and do whatever here, or do a def create, passing in self and validated data, and doing whatever here as well. But those are optional as well, as our hyperlinked model serializer also has those methods implemented as well. Go ahead and just delete that for this. We'll save that. I'll actually comment out this hyperlink because I want to use the other model serializers. And now with those changes, we can do a Python 3 manage.py run server. And our server runs fine, so everything should be working just like that. So that was a really basic overview of how serializers work and how we can convert data. I guess the big takeaway here would just be, well, what serializers allow us to do is take our model objects we save using these models, take them, convert them into a Python dictionary or whatever else, and then we can take that Python dictionary, pass it to one of those renderers, and then get JSON data that we actually can send as a response for our REST API. So it's just kind of like that intermediary step, that bridge in between the model instance objects and the JSON we want to send at the very end. It's just kind of that conversion step in the middle. So hopefully that made sense. There's many more options you could go through in this documentation if you want to. There's other serializers. You can serialize multiple objects with a list serializer. There's a base serializer. There's all more advanced usage of serializers, different third-party packages that may help you out some if you want to look through those. There's also many ways to update things differently and whatever else with the things we already talked about. Many more options to override and change if you want to. That's all in here to go through if you'd like to. But in this video, I want to just do a quick kind of crash course over serializers and how they work, and hopefully help get you using them and understand what exactly they're doing inside of your Django REST framework project. So that's really it. The code will be in the description below, both beginning and after this video, as well as any other links to documentation or anything else that might be helpful. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.